Defense today on the Locked On Syracuse podcast. It is a twofer on this Wednesday. We're going to give you 2 of our 10 thoughts. Talking about Jesse Edwards. What will his development look like? What does a step for him this season look like? And also, defense was a sore spot a season ago. Will it continue to plague the Orange this time around as well? That's all coming up on the Locked On Syracuse podcast.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome on in. It's your Wednesday Locked On Syracuse podcast. Tyler Aki and Tim Leonard. Today's episode of Locked On Syracuse is brought to you by McDonald's, proudly serving communities since 1965. McDonald's has always been more than just a place to get tasty, affordable food. It's an unofficial community center. A big thank you to our friends at McDonald's for always being there. I'm loving it. All right, Tim. So today we're going to get into some stuff with the centers, specifically with Jesse Edwards. What's a leap going to look like for him? Also going to talk a little bit about the defense as well. But thank you for making Locked On Syracuse your first listen every single day. We really appreciate that. Rate it 5 stars, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. That includes YouTube. We're free and available on all platforms there. All right, let's start off with Jesse Edwards and what a step constitutes for him this upcoming season. He was solid last year, really emerged lately. I don't think you can really judge his numbers from last season to denote the impact that he made, especially once he got into the NCAA tournament and once he got into the ACC tournament in the latter portions of the season. But he came in, and for a guy who hadn't had a real traditional offseason and just all the experiences he went through, I thought did a pretty good job, all things considered.
Yeah, for a guy that wasn't ready, his head coach said for a good chunk of the year, he looked pretty ready at the end. Now, I think he clearly got a lot better as the season progressed, and it wasn't like he was terrific last year, but he was a body in there that, at least eye test wise, it felt like really changed our defense. Now, I will say the more I dug into the numbers, it was pretty much, when you look at the splits on and off defensively, pretty similar in terms of when Dolezaj was back there at the anchor position, when Jesse Edwards was back there. So the big thing for him this year is a full year in the zone, a full year of growing. And Boeheim has said it's, I don't know what he used, maybe light years or night and day was his analogy of what it was compared to last year, this year. Mm-hmm. Yeah, something like that. And he said that about Anselm too. So if they really are going to progress, it starts on the defensive end of the court, because we're going to talk about the defense today, but that's an area where maybe they could be a little better than they were last year at that 5 position. And when you look at the other positions of the defense, I'm not sure we're going to see any progression or increase in defensive production at the forward or guard position. So it's really important that Jesse Edwards has a big year this year.
I look at what he did defensively, right? Like you mentioned, defense is going to be the most important thing for him. And honestly, probably the thing that will separate him from Frank Anselm from a playing time perspective for the bulk of the season. But when you look at his close to the season, he appeared down the stretch in every single sort of tournament game that this team played in. But ultimately, your availability is crucial. And he got himself into foul trouble in times where he played limited minutes. Like I look at that West Virginia game in the NCAA tournament, 4 fouls in 7 minutes. That can't happen. He fouled out of games as well. There's the UNC game he fouled out of, but he's going to have to learn to avoid the foul trouble too. Otherwise, Frank's going to get his chance to get in there, and Frank's going to honestly could get his chance to maybe leapfrog him for the starting position as well if he goes in there, because Jesse's struggling in foul trouble. And Frank goes in there and plays really, really well.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up. I kind of slipped my mind how foul prone he was last year and how much
and it wasn't just him.
With that.
I mean, it was like every big man.
Right, but I guess that is a trend too that makes it even more concerning as you head into this year. When you're playing that 5 position of the 2-3 zone, you get a lot of fouls called on you. That's just been kind of the nature of it. So Jesse Edwards has to be cognizant of that, because if he is going to play 25 minutes, 30 minutes a night, if he's going to be the quote-unquote starter, we need him out there. And maybe that's partially why Jim Boeheim tried out Jimmy Boeheim at the 5 in this exhibition game. You know, he tried Cole Swider at the 2 a little bit as well. This is when you work on those type of lineups, and the player said afterwards they kind of just done that sporadically. And we've talked about, I don't think we're going to see Jimmy Boeheim at the 5 by design or something that we're going to see very often this year, but Jesse Edwards has to stay on the court. And that was something Barama really struggled with.
Yeah.
And we had to go to Jesse Edwards in some of those games.
Even
when
Marek,
he was way underdeveloped.
too.
Yeah, Marek
struggled with it as well, staying in games. So I look at some of the big games that he played last season. I think there's that stretch late February, early March that kind of sticks out to me at Georgia Tech and then at home against UNC, going up against Moses Wright a season ago, ACC Player of the Year last year. And Jesse
doesn't
goes
seem right, but yes,
right. But he did have a really good season last year, and Jesse went out there, had 7 points, 8 rebounds, one of his best games of his career, and then he follows it up the next game against a team that is always going to throw you fits with the big men. And UNC gets 6 points, 8 rebounds, and 4 steals in that game. Also has a block as well. And it's those things that are promising. But it's kind of like what we've said with Barama too. We've seen Barama have his flashes. We've seen him dominate against Pitt with double-doubles. We've seen him play extremely well in spurts that end right before COVID struck as well. But I need to see it a little bit more, because you follow that up with a game where you get with 4 fouls and you get yourself into foul trouble and you only play a handful of minutes. You're going to need to see consistency out of the centers. I'm a little bit more confident because we saw it down the stretch, but it ultimately is going to come down to fouls and staying out of foul trouble.
Yeah, the more I thought about this and the more I sort of prepared for what we're talking about today, I think he's the X factor of the team. You could probably debate a couple other players, but so who would you say is the X factor?
I haven't thought about it quite yet, but just off the top of my head, who the X factor might be. Jesse
Girard,
certainly,
maybe?
Yeah, Jesse's certainly in the conversation. I think how well Girard plays point guard in particular. Like if he's an off the ball guy, I'm pretty confident in what he can be off the ball, but how well he maneuvers the actual point guard position is an X factor to me. And I also think whoever the starter ends up being for the long term during the season between Jimmy and Benny is another conversation to be had as an X factor guy. I just think that the center position offensively is something that you just know what you're getting going into the year, right? It's not going to be a lot, and you're not expecting a lot. And that's why I think with this team, I'd probably lean with point guard Joe or whoever's going to be that 5th starter, in terms of like we pretty much know who 4 of the starters are. The 5th one's sort of up in the air between Benny and Jimmy. Probably going to be Jimmy, but that could always change at some point during the season. So I would probably lean that, but like Jesse's certainly in the team photo.
Yeah, I think also you can make case for Benny just because he has a wide array of outcomes this year. And if he is good, then maybe that changes how good we are. But for me, what determines the ceiling of this team is defense. We know what they're going to be offensively. We know they're going to shoot the basketball well. They're going to have some really good games that upset teams based on their shooting. And I think we kind of know what we're going to get from Jesse on offense, barring sort of a breakthrough in that regard. But in order for our team to actually be an NCAA tournament contender, go on a little bit of a run, compete at the ACC, and be a top 5 ACC team, they just have to be better defensively than they were last year. And Jesse Edwards is that guy that I think really determines the defense more than any other player this year. You can point to the top of the 2-3 zone, but for me, it's that anchor position, and that's such a big role this year, and that's such a big reason why Syracuse has slipped up defensively in the past couple years. So I think he is the X factor, and I think when you think about those spurts that we had last year, I mean, there were 2 or 3 times that it felt like he came in a game and had like a plus 15, plus 16 at the end of the first half, or it was some big run. When we were playing our best basketball, it's when Jesse Edwards was back there on those runs. And that's the flashes that give you hope that maybe if he harnesses all that into a full year, he's gotten better in the offseason, maybe he can be that guy for this team this year.
So his counting statistics last season weren't good. And you don't expect him to be when he's playing the amount of minutes that he was playing last year. I think it was below 9 minutes per game last year is what it averaged out to when it was all said and done. But just looking on KenPom, his percentages, especially rebounding the basketball, were phenomenal. It's just that the sample size is so small on him from a season ago. So he only played 14% of the minutes last year, but 20.5% rebounding percentage on defense, and then an 11.5 on offense. For context here, Quincy Guerrier was one of the best rebounders on the team. He was at 18% on defense and 9.5 on offense. So Jesse's got him by 2 percentage points in both of those categories right there. He can be a great rebounder. Now, the big thing with him was this offseason building strength up, right?
Right.
And he's going to have to continue to do that because there were times last year where he'd get the ball and then he'd bring it down. He's got to be able to get the rebound, hold it up high, stay strong with it, and then have a good outlet pass to Joe or Samir or whoever's leading the charge.
Yeah, and I noticed he was doing that a little bit better, it seemed like, in the exhibition games. And
there was an effort. You could see it, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure that's what they're working on, and that's what they should be working on. Boeheim did say that in the first half of this latest game against Lemoyne, he just wasn't given the effort. He wasn't coming down with the rebounds he needs to. And that's concerning if he's not doing it against Lemoyne, because it's only going to get tougher from here. He seemed to sort of kick it into gear a little bit in the second half, but that's why I just feel like how he rebounds, how he defends, those are the two biggest question marks of the team. And it kind of starts with him for me on how good we're going to be at those two things.
All right, we're going to get into the defense next because we kind of hit on Jesse. Jesse's a big part of the defense, but the numbers weren't great last year, and the early projections aren't great this year, according to KenPom. So we'll fill you in on all that stuff. But first, college football fanatics, have you heard about Prize Picks? It is daily fantasy made easy. Tim and I love it, and we know that you will too. Prize Picks is the leader in college sports daily fantasy. They offer more college football props than anybody in the world and offers all the star players of the Power 5, as well as mid-major players that you might not have even heard of. So they give you anything from yardage to touchdowns, even interceptions thrown. And any user that deposits and use our promo code LOCKEDON will receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100. All you got to do is use our promo code LOCKEDON. Just pick 2 to 5 players with an over-under on their projections, and you can win up to 10 times on any entry. It's just you versus the projected numbers. And with Syracuse basketball around the corner, Syracuse football in full swing, guess what? You can mix those coming up shortly. So get in on all that action coming up just around the corner. It's going to start up next week. Can't wait for that. So we'll be active on Prize Picks. We'll be using Prize Picks as part of the prop shop as well. It only takes 60 seconds to make an entry, safe, and offers fast withdrawals as well. So don't hesitate. Check out prizepicks.com. Use the promo code LOCKEDON or go to your app store and download the app today. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy.
This episode of Locked On Syracuse is also brought to you by McDonald's. Proudly serving communities since 1965, McDonald's has always been more than just a place to get tasty, affordable food. It's a place where friends and family can come to reconnect, a place where classmates can meet up for a study group, knowing they'll have dependable Wi-Fi and endless supplies of French fries and McFlurries. Or do Tyler's favorite thing, combine the French fry with the McFlurry. I know you love that. Mm-hmm. Win or lose, it's a place where teammates, competitors, the home team, or the away team can come to recharge. It's the place you always look forward to stopping at on a long road trip to rest your legs and refuel. If I'm making a road trip, I know that I'm going to McDonald's. It is my favorite place to stop at on long road trips. After a long day at Syracuse, you and I spent plenty of nights going to the Erie Boulevard McDonald's. I'm sure people are still doing it out there. It is one of our favorite spots. So head to your local McDonald's to refuel and reconnected. Somebody say Locked On Syracuse watch party, perhaps McDonald's. I'm loving it.
All right, let's dive into the defense here because it's one of the sore spots from a season ago. Last year, they ranked 77th in KenPom's defensive efficiency metric. And that is one of the worst they've had in recent memory. When you look back at the history, and sort of been a bit of a trend that you'd like to buck here. The year before
119 before that,
100,
right?
yeah. 116 was the number before that. And then heading into this year, KenPom does the early projections on everything and is projecting Syracuse to be 83rd for this year. But KenPom does also say these early projections don't mean a whole heck of a lot. Wait for some data to actually get filtered in. But you're coming off of a stretch where you had a bunch of teams that were really strong, top 20 pretty much every single year since 2010. When you look at how good the defense was, there were a couple blips outside the top 20. You look at the 2017 one that obviously comes to mind. That's the one you're probably thinking of. They were 119th. In the rankings,
the NIT year, right?
Yep. But yeah, no, this is something that people are wondering: how will Syracuse fare this season defensively, especially with all these new faces in? So I'll ask you, from last season to this season, do you think there's going to be an improvement with this defense?
Well, let's just go down the list, right? I mean, same backcourt, Girard and Buddy.
Mhm.
I don't think they're going to get worse because it's another year in the 2-3 zone, but it's worth noting that this is the third year, I guess, of the Girard and Buddy tandem back there. We had 116 and 77 in KenPom defense in the first 2 years of that. I'm not saying it's all on them, but we haven't had a great defense with them as our backcourt yet. You lose
But that is
Kadari.
improvement. That
Yeah,
isn't,
it is
like,
improvement,
that's
right?
a pretty stark improvement as well.
Exactly. So you lose Kadari, you add Symir. I think Symir is a good defender, but I think that's a negative considering Kadari was one of the top steals guys in the conference, and we all know what he did on that end of the court. Forward position, you basically sub Alan Griffin, Quincy, and Robert Braswell for this new tandem we got: Cole Swider, Jimmy Boeheim, Benny Williams. I don't know if that's necessarily a strong downgrade or a strong difference defensively one way or the other, because Griffin didn't seem to grasp the concepts of the zone a ton, but athletically it's a downgrade. In experience in the zone, it's a downgrade as well, I would say, because Quincy was a guy that was entering his second year last year. Braswell was definitely a solid defender. And then their center, we've talked about, it's a different type of player at the center position, but that's the big question mark. How good is Jesse going to be defensively and Frank going to be defensively? And if Barama is healthy compared to what we got from Marek there last year, which, I mean, say what you want, but when we had Marek as our center last year, we were better defensively than when we had Barama. And I'm not saying Barama's Jesse, but that's just one way of looking at it.
Right. I mean, Marek's going to hurt. That loss is going to be accentuate. You're going to feel it, I think, early on with how much he and all the little things. Someone's going to have to pick up that Marek role, that fan favorite type of role quickly. And I don't know if that person's necessarily on the roster. You might be able to Frankenstein it with a couple different players that are coming in this year, but I don't know. It's big shoes to fill. That's for certain. And I'm looking at, I will say this, what I've seen from Cole Swider, and it's just exhibition, but it feels like he grasps the concepts decently well from what I've seen so far. It seems like he looks comfortable out there. He's got his head on a swivel. It seems like he's good with that high forward playing role as well. So I'm not as worried about Cole Swider as maybe I was heading into the season. Now, we'll see how it plays out against Lafayette on less than a week now, but I'm not as worried about Cole. Benny's got the athleticism where there's promise there, and Jimmy, I mean, they were giving him diagrams of this when he was in his crib. So
Right.
that to me is, I'm a little more encouraged, I think, with the new group. And then Jesse, I mean, this is year 3 for him too.
Yeah. So, and I think I even brought this up last year a little bit, but everyone talks about the top of the 2-3 zone. And I think that becomes the hyper criticized, hyper focused area, because we always think about 3-point shooting as being a flaw to a 2-3 zone if you're just a casual basketball watcher. The thing is, Syracuse has really been solid 3-point defense wise. They weren't great a couple years ago. Last year, 65th in the country. And a lot of people will argue that 3-point defense comes down to luck a little bit as well. Their free throw percentage defense, which is definitely comes down to luck, was pretty unlucky last year.
That's DeBundo's favorite thing, because what was it? Right. UCLA had the best free throw defense in the country last year, which is the dumbest metric out there. But I mean, Syracuse, I'm looking at it right now. They were 305th in free throw defense,
which is unlucky. Yeah,
which is just, it's flat out unlucky. Well. Yeah,
right. So the thing that everyone talks about is that, but when you really, and I did this last year, and I remember having this argument last year, but when you really look at the numbers, what has changed for us in the past couple of years has been our field goal percentage defense at the rim. Last year, we allowed opponents to shoot 60% at the rim, 229th in the nation. Year before that, when we had Sidibe back there, who's a 7-footer, 66% at the rim, that was 338th in the nation. 2 years preceding that, pretty good defenses with Pascal Chukwu, 42nd best at the rim defensive field goal percentage in 2018-19, 30th best defense on KenPom. 2017-18, we had the 5th best defense on KenPom. It was 29th in the country in terms of field goal percentage at the rim. We've had a huge drop-off in that since Chukwu has left, since his shot blocking has left. And all that during that time when Girard and Boeheim become as the top of the 2-3 zone, our 3-point defense it's kind of up and down, but it's pretty similar to what it was when we had really good defenses. So that's the area for me. And that's why when I talk about Jesse Edwards, I think he's the X factor this year.
And I'm looking right now. So the block percentage for Syracuse from a season ago, that was 8th best in the country. But I will say that is a little bit flawed, in my opinion, just because of the fact that you're going to see teams shoot all these threes on you. I mean,
Yeah,
you
it's
look
always
at
high in the zone. Block
yeah,
percentage, steal percentage, I feel like are
yeah.
always really
And
good for us.
with your possession length as well defensively, I mean, you slow things down. You let the shot clock work itself. You see teams take long possessions. A lot of times you'll hear that shot clock buzzer go off. So with the number of possessions, it's a little bit of a flawed thing there to say they are as good as they are in terms of blocking shots. But no, that's a really good point that you bring up there. And they're going to need that rim presence, or otherwise this could be another one of those seasons where, I mean, it's frustrating when you see the team that throws the lob over the top, right? Like, how many times did we see that when we were watching that Virginia team operate on Syracuse? It would be Ty Jerome to DeAndre Hunter over the top, or to Jay Huff over the top. UNC does it every single year on Syracuse. It's frustrating to watch. And what's terrifying this year is what's Paolo Banchero going to do? Because he can play above the rim, and they've got crafty guards too.
Yeah, and look, I'm not saying that Girard and Boeheim are like, they don't have any blame in this. Obviously they do, and I laid out how since they have been at the top of the 2-3 zone, we haven't had a good defense yet. But I mean, 2018, I'm looking at the numbers now, that top 5 defense on KenPom, when we had a good top of the 2-3 zone defense, 31.8% was what teams shot against us from 3-point range. Last year, 77th in the country on KenPom defense, 31.8% 3-point defense, exact same number. Now, you could say that in 2018, it was a little bit easier to hold teams to that number than what it was last year. And I think even our national ranking has dipped despite being the same percentage, because there's just more shooters in college basketball nowadays. That's probably at least partially the reason. But I think when we talk about the 2-3 zone, a lot of people just immediately talk about, oh yeah, Girard and Boeheim at the top. That's our big flaw. And I think that's probably the start of the problems on a lot of possessions. But having that rim protector back there, having Jesse back there, if he can step up this year, that's where it separates us from what we have been on defense the past couple years to getting back to what we were when we did have good defenses.
All right, coming up, I want to do a little bit of an exercise here. We're going to rank who are the best zone defenders on this team and what we're expecting projection-wise for where all of these pieces fit in. And we thank you for making Locked On Syracuse your first listen every single day. We're free and available on all platforms. Thank you. Go subscribe. Go rate the podcast too, wherever you get your podcasts. And before we get to those rankings, I need to remind you guys about Built Bar, because it is the best tasting protein bar out there. If you haven't tried it by now, you're missing out. And Tim and I have been talking about Built Bar for a little over a year now at this point. Most protein bars are chalky, waxy, sometimes just plain hard to choke down, but Built Bars are soft, covered in 100% real chocolate, and when you bite into it, you know you're eating something different. It's more of an experience and one that you'll enjoy. In fact, you'd swear you're eating a candy bar. They're low carb, low calorie, low fat, low sugar, and high in protein. So all the healthy benefits on top of being just so purely delicious, with so many different flavors as well, including coconut, raspberry, mint brownie, coconut almond, and our favorite, the peanut butter brownie. And there's plenty more, as well as this month where Built Bar is coming out with new limited time flavors every 3 to 4 days. So check out their website often, because you don't want to miss out on this opportunity. Go to Built.com, use the promo code LOCK15 to get 15% off your order. Again, promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com.
Guys, BetOnline remains your number one spot for all basketball and football action this season. Head over to their new updated desktop or mobile website. Just put in betonline.ag in your browser. Sign up today. It's totally free to sign up. And once you do, you can receive a 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Just use our promo code Locked On, all one word, for that 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Again, the promo code is Locked On, all one word, LOCKEDON. From basketball, football, baseball, postseason, NHL, boxing, and UFC, right now it is a great time to be watching sports and betting on sports. So don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet all your favorite sports. BetOnline, where the games start.
Time to rank these zone defenders now. This is a little bit of a difficult exercise, especially with so many new faces, but we've seen a little bit of a sample size, and I think you can project some guys based on their length, athleticism, strength, all that stuff. You can give a little bit of a projection on some of these guys. So we'll roll with the 8 guys that we're expecting to play significant minutes. I'm going to leave John Bull out. I'm going to leave Barama out because we don't know how much playing time they're going to see this season. So obviously the 5 starters, and then Benny Williams, Frank Anselm, Samir Torrance. So we'll start with number 8 here. For me, I think it's pretty easy. I think Joe Girard has proven he's limited in that zone defense, and his size is something that certainly works against him. Just 6'1", and I mean he's not the quickest guy out there as well, but he does play hard. He's got that quarterback mentality to him too. I think it's something where he's going to get better. I think he's gotten better, but there's still plenty of work that needs to be done.
Yeah, this is a tough exercise. I mean, this is a lot of guys this year that I would just put as slightly below average zone defenders on one team.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you probably have to say Joe at 8. I mean, certainly Symir versus Joe out there at the point guard spot is going to be a big difference defensively. You would have to think this year. But at the same time, Cole Swider wasn't very good defensively at Villanova. I mean, he's probably, for me, kind of one of the next names that comes up. I know he's 6'9", and I know a lot of people are going to talk about his length, but it's the athleticism between him and Jimmy that is really the concern going forward. So I think there's a group of guys that are kind of similar to Joe, despite, I think, just Joe, you'd probably put 8.
I think you could sort of clump up guys like Joe, Jimmy, Cole. I mean, they kind of all fall into the same category. I'd give Buddy, I'm not too out on Buddy. I know some people want to lump him in there, but when you're 6'5" at the top of that zone, I know he's not the quickest guy out there, but he's got the length that certainly can pose some mismatches and some fits at the top.
And he's flexible, right? He can play the forward spot for us too. And I guess we should give Cole Swider some credit for that as well, the way that he stepped up to the top of the 2-3 zone. You hit on it earlier. I think when we talked to Cole, that was a big takeaway for me. He's a high IQ kid. He knows basketball really well. He studies the game a lot. The 2-3 zone principles, he definitely knows about as good as you can know. It's just, is he athletic enough to be well suited?
Execution wise,
right?
What's he gonna bring? All right, so are you with Joe? You're going Joe number 8 as well?
Yeah, probably Joe 8, Jimmy 7, the more I think about it, because I think Cole being able to play at the top of the zone already, I think he's just looked better defensively in that regard, but it's just so tough to say because it's Pace and Lemoyne, and they both seem to be doing fine, you know?
Yeah, and listen, you're not going to gain a lot, and we saw a little bit of Jimmy at the 5 too. I don't think that's going to be something that we're going to see a whole heck of a lot this year. Hopefully, we don't see a lot of it either. But it's just kind of the wait and see. I'm going to agree with you there. I think Jimmy's probably the right call at 7. For 6, for me, I think it is probably Cole. I think he's a lot better than I thought he would be. I thought there was a chance he could be 8 on this list, but from what I've seen, I'll put him at 6.
Yeah, he's 6'9". He's really active, it seems like. Definitely is going to get his hands on some passes and stuff. I think once we get into now, it probably who's 5? I guess Buddy maybe 5. Because this next tier is when we get to guys that I would actually maybe classify as good. I mean, Frank Anselm is kind of a question mark, so maybe you put him 5, Buddy 4, and then just talking out loud, I think the top 3 is pretty clear for me between Jesse, Benny, and Symir Torrance in some order of those 3.
I think I would probably go, my number 1 is Jesse, and I feel pretty good about that. And then 2, 3, I'd probably go Benny. I mean, he had the 5 steals against Lemoyne, and you can say, okay, it's Lemoyne, but just being in the right spot at the right time means a lot. And he's got the athleticism, he's got the length, and I think he's going to make a couple of big defensive plays this year. And I think he's a pretty good defensive player, even if Syracuse did play in some sort of man-to-man set, which they obviously won't, but he's got the tools, I think, to be a good defensive player no matter what system he's in. And I think the same can be said about Samir.
Yeah, no doubt. So I guess going full circle now, back to our original question, given the 8 players that we just listed, and I talked about how you compare it to last year, and KenPom has a 77 last year, 83 this year, I think that's pretty fair. Like, I don't think we can expect them to be top 50 KenPom defense based on the roster this year. And that's unfortunate because that limits your ceiling a lot. What do
Right.
you think? Can they get to better than 77 this year?
Well, so you brought up X factors for the team as a whole. I think it comes down to a couple
Yeah.
X factors defensively for this. Like when you're looking at X factors on defense, I think there's two guys, and I don't think it's close as to who has to be serviceable defensively. It's Joe and it's Cole. And if they're not serviceable defensively, this team's
Yeah.
going to struggle on that end of the floor immensely.
Right. Yeah, I just don't. I mean, that's my one sort of caveat or hiccup from getting there all the way with this being a top 25 team. I love what we're seeing on the offensive end. Great ball
I'm not
movement,
worried
great
one
chemistry.
bit about offense. Not worried one
Yeah,
bit.
right. But okay,
Like,
what were they?
right now, I
23.
think Ken Palm's got him at 18 on
Yeah,
offense
and
right
I was
now.
gonna say they're 23
That-
last year.
That team could be like top 10, top 5 maybe.
But even if they're top 10, if you've got, it's almost like what Iowa was last year a little
Right.
bit.
Mm-hmm.
If you got a defense that we don't think is possible of getting to top 50 defense, can you really be a top 20 team in America? I don't know.
Right. No, you can't. But the thing about Iowa is when they were playing well last year, there were stretches where they were playing good defense. Like they improved their Ken Palm rating tremendously. I remember there's one stretch where I think they were outside
Well, they
the
went
top
to some
100
zone too, which is kind of funny, and that helped them.
Exactly. And then they moved like to top 70 or top 60 for a little bit because they had a really good stretch of playing defense. And it's going to come down to, does Cole pick things up? Can Joe take a leap defensively? And I think I'm a little more confident in Cole because tools wise and unteachables wise, Cole has it. Joe doesn't. But then you do the flip flop, the reverse when it comes to experience.
Yeah, and it's still like Cole has the length, but does he have the athleticism that is required for the zone defense? I think Cole's going to be a really positive player for us this year. It's just when we look at what they have defensively compared to what it was last year, it's hard for me to sit up here and confidently say, you know what, that was a blip last year. They're just going to be better this year. I think it's just they can only get so much better. And for me, best case scenario is them being like 50th best defense statistically in Ken Palm.
Yeah. I mean, and listen, at the end of the day, if you can score 80, 85 points, you'll live with that. Right?
Yeah.
You'll win some games that you shouldn't. You'll also lose some games you shouldn't. I think that's going to be the mantra of this team this year, which I'd much rather it be that than some of the other seasons that we've seen out of Syracuse.
Right. From a fun standpoint, yes. I think I'm a little more old school than you in the sense that I still think the best Syracuse teams start with their 2-3 zone defense. And I guess last year, I mean, they made it to the Sweet 16. They didn't have a good defense. That's what really matters, what you do in the tournament. So I'm not saying they can't do it with this defense. It's just I'd rather them be better on the defensive end than they are right now for projecting what they're going to do this year.
Yeah, and again, when it gets into the tournament, you'd almost rather you have the better offensive team too, because the 2-3 zone just kind of sneaks up on some teams in the tournament, right? It's something they haven't schemed for all year. You get that weird opponent. Syracuse is that weird opponent that teams don't like to prepare for because it's something unorthodox, something you haven't seen really all season long. And you get into that tournament and it's kind of anything goes. And as long as your offense is traveling, your defense is always going to have a slight advantage because of the fact that it's new, it's green to the opponent.
Yeah, that's probably a good point, and that's maybe why we're still struggling now as we get deeper into these ACC teams that prepared for Syracuse and they know the 2-3 zone pretty well. But yeah, I think it's going to be interesting. This determines their ceiling, right? If they grow defensively and they prove me wrong here, they could be a top 25 team.
Like if they're
we know what we're getting on
50
offense.
Defense, they're not top 25. They're probably like top 20, top 15 in the country then.
Right.
The offense
then they're Iowa,
good.
basically. Yeah. I mean, like they're a legit, really good team that is led by their offense. And there's plenty of those teams. Wisconsin had one of those one year. They made it to the Final Four with a bad defense. It's just when you do look at Final Four teams, typically they have a top 30 defense in Ken Palm at the end of the year.
Well, I mean, you see a lot of teams that are like top 15 in both.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
You need both.
That's fair.
Yeah, to be that Final Four caliber team. All right. Tomorrow on the show, we're going to talk about a little more offense. Today was all defense. Tomorrow, we're going to get into offense because we're talking Buddy Boeheim. What is he going to be like this season? And is he an All-American this season? We're going to stack him up against the competition. So all things Buddy Boeheim on tomorrow's show. We might hit some other news and notes as well on the program. So stay tuned for that. For Tim, I'm Tyler. We will talk to you guys tomorrow.